The views reflected by any of the guests may not reflect the views of the podcast host. Some topics may be difficult for some listeners. Proceed at your own risk. This podcast does not replace psychotherapy or advice and is for entertainment purposes only. Welcome to Hopeology. I'm your host, Christina McKelvey. Today we're going to be speaking with Lan Nguyen. She talks about her work with adult children whose parents may have borderline and narcissistic personality disorders and how she assists her clients in their healing. She also speaks about her own experience and the importance of being a cycle breaker of trauma. We're going to be right back after this short break. Welcome to Hopeology, stories of hope, healing, and resilience. I'm your host, Christina McKelvey. Today we have Lan Nguyen. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I know, we met through a mutual organization for therapists. And so I always love having therapists on because there's just so many topics within the therapy world. So thank you so much for being here.
Yes, I'm so glad to talk about what we'll be talking about today. I do think it's important information, and I'm really glad to connect with a fellow therapist.
Same. Well, let's begin. Tell me a little bit about the topic that you wanted to, share with listeners.
Well, I guess overall, I've just noticed more and more female clients coming to see me in my own private practice. But I would imagine this is a growing concern. But it's basically adult children of parents who exhibit borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. I focus more into borderline.
Mm-hmm.
I've just seen that come up within my caseload more than 20 times. So I've lost count, but at one point, 20 clients out of maybe my 40 clients.
Mm-hmm.
Mothers, and they were all female and mothers with traits that I would say were pretty in line with borderline personality disorder. I can't make that formal diagnosis, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing the patterns, there were just ways to navigate all of that, heal from it, recover, and just cope.
Mm-hmm. So you saw this pattern of clients coming in with these traits. What made you, did you initially start practice with that in mind, or was it just something that happened?
Naturally, it wasn't something that I thought of, and I was like, oh, I definitely need to focus on this. Seems to be finding me. With that kind of insight, I noticed patterns. If you do have a mother or a father who has kind of these unstable traits, it naturally lends itself to depression, anxiety, panic attacks, trust issues, imposter syndrome, social anxiety, the gamut of issues, right? Complicated and complex grief, post-traumatic stress disorder, complex post-traumatic stress. So when I dug deeper into family history, maybe they live with their parents, maybe there's been strained family dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that if I dug into, oh, wow, let's talk about your mom. What are some things that you notice? And then if I kind of gave them a battery of questions, ones that you necessarily wouldn't find in the DSM, because the DSM is quite vague about it. But if I just drew out, for instance, do you feel like your mother happens to be a lot nicer in public than she is at home? Almost like she's wearing a mask. They'd be like, oh yeah, definitely. Or do you ever feel like your mom is insistent that she did not do something or can't remember doing something, and you have maybe 3 or 4 witnesses to say she did? And those sorts of like nuanced kind of day-to-day interactions, they would be like, oh my gosh, I thought I was the crazy one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely not in your DSM manual.
Okay. I'm curious how those individuals with borderline personality disorder, how complex trauma and intergenerational trauma play into individuals diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and how that might also play into maybe parenting and the clients you see.
It's inevitable. I mean, borderline personality disorder, it's hard to say where the trauma gets, enough into a field of like, oh, this is full blown a personality disorder. But both of my parents were refugees, right? So they escaped Vietnam in the midst of the fall of Saigon with the war and everything collapsing. So there was trauma there. And I would imagine all of this, right? I do think naturally within certain cultures, shame being a predominant kind of motivating factor. I felt that very strongly in my household, with my mom straight up telling me, all families go through this. You don't have to tell anyone about this.
And then at least my experience, when I started doing my own work and working as a therapist, and all that insight started coming, like, oh, that's why.
Oh, yeah.
And how do you use your personal experience, or how is your personal experience growing up, or how does that shape your treatment approach when you are working with your clients?
Well, I think it often starts with validation. My parents didn't, beat me per se. I know they didn't have the best marriage, but they sacrificed for me. And so there's so much of this narrative of, while maybe still being, stereotypically a good parent.
Being human.
Yeah, being human. But at the same time, they might shield themselves from the reality of, maybe it wasn't as normal as they thought. And so I think the validation piece comes into play, where I have to teach a lot of my clients, your health meter might be a little wonky, right? You might have been told that this is fine when, I don't think you would ever want that or wish that upon anyone else. So for a lot of my clients, they can see that for others, but not for themselves. And I do think validating and having that experience myself to be able to go into more of the nitty gritty, not just the DSM kind of textbook answer, allows people to feel understood, to not feel crazy, and to finally kind of regain their voice, because maybe they've been silenced, or maybe they felt like, my voice isn't important because I'm the crazy one.
When in reality, that wasn't actually the narrative.
No, yeah. And that's the interesting part. They might not even be aware that there was a separate sort of narrative happening, that they had been kind of tricked, gaslit into this other reality, when the reality ahead of them is like, there was nothing you could have done. You were just a child. You did not deserve that. You deserved more. You deserve the best. And so I think for a lot of my clients, it's hard, especially given other kind of like cultural factors. A lot of my clients being Asian American, Pacific Islander, or just people of color, naturally there's filial piety. I can't say these things about my parents. It doesn't feel right.
The respect. Yeah.
Yeah. Even just speaking about it. I remember even telling myself that I would never be able to write a memoir until my parents died. Because I'm thinking, I don't want to disrespect them, at least not when they're alive.
And that's I think maybe the concept of shame. I'm curious, like how like shame can play into how shame can hinder the healing process, especially like maybe with cultural factors and other norms like that. She's nodding her head up and down. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Shame is huge like I said, it's a huge motivator. I talk about this concept of fog. It stands for fear, obligation, and guilt. And it it was coined by a book in, I think, the late 90s about emotional manipulation, emotional abuse. But that's basically what happens in these dysfunctional family systems where you're seeing, if you only like loved me, or you're so ungrateful, how would you treat me like this? Or, after all we've done for you, all the sacrifices we've made, how can you disobey us like this? So there's a lot of those sentiments being circulated. And so a lot of my clients come to me in the fog, fear, obligation, guilt. They're making decisions out of that fogginess, out of that confusion. And they're wondering why they're running on empty. They're wondering why they feel so unfulfilled, or they're burnt out, or they're just, triggered easily by everything.
And so setting that framework, really helps them kind of start that process.
Yeah. After they're able to basically demonstrate some self-compassion, having some self-compassion for themselves allows them to finally have the appropriate kind of anger, right? They might not have anger towards anyone but themselves. And maybe they could actually have anger directed towards the right sources, right? Maybe they could actually grieve. And I do a lot of that with my clients, right? They can't change their parents. So they're grieving the reality of their childhood. They're grieving the reality of their current present day interactions with family.
Grieving what could have been. I have, with some of my clients, I will have them part of a reparenting process, write a letter to them, to their childhood self as, an older mentor or a big brother or big sister or a parent, and kind of validate what they went through. And then I might even have them re-narrate their story, retell their story and how they want it to be. And I have noticed that has helped them feel healed. I don't know if that made sense. Experience healing.
Oh, no, I definitely see that. I do a lot of that, kind of helping clients to reclaim their narrative, right? I am also certified in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which a big component is narrative.
Yeah.
Though I wouldn't say I formally have gone through the protocol, I do employ a lot of those techniques to allow clients to look back at their history more objectively, right? Who were they before the trauma? Who were they after? What might they name those chapters of their lives? What might they want to name their entire book? And how would that healing look? But like you're saying, I do a lot of letter writing, or at least I suggest it to clients. I can't force them to do it. And a lot of them shy away from doing the hard work because it's a lot. It's very emotionally taxing, but it might look like writing a letter to their younger self. It might look like writing a letter to their ideal parent. Here lies my ideal parent. You never showed up. I really wanted you to be there. Could look like writing a letter to their sibling or to their actual parent, ones that they will never send because at some point, some of the processing and acceptance just needs to come from their own experience. So yeah, the practice of unsent letters is really common in my practice.
Unsent letters. Yes, same. I do have some feedback. Hopefully, I don't know if I'm going to hopefully I don't have to edit out, but someone's doing a weed whacker right now.
Oh, okay.
No worries. They never do this time.
Right. It's just Murphy's Law.
It is. I don't have a studio. I'm not that bougie where I have
I don't either. So I told my husband he had to leave because the garage door triggers my dogs to bark.
Oh no. Well, this may or may not be edited out because it's kind of fun to have a little silliness.
Yes. Yeah. So my dogs haven't barked yet, but that's because he already left right before we started recording.
Well, you might hear my cat, but he's so cold. He's buried under blankets right now.
Oh.
Because he's like, I hate winter. He's a desert cat, and we don't live in the desert anymore. So
a little burrito, right?
Yes. Oh, I love that burrito. So Lan, tell me a little bit about your healing journey. Did it look similar to how you navigate your client's healing journey, or did it look a little different?
I would say a lot of it looks similar. And depending on the client, it may take longer, it may take shorter, right? I just remember I considered myself in my own therapy as like an A+ student, right? I did the readings, I did above and beyond the readings. I read Body Keeps the Score all by myself, like over the span of 2 evenings.
And that's such a clinical book. Like I was telling clients all about it, and then finally I read it myself. I'm like, this is a textbook.
Yeah, it's very dense. It's not like your summer beach read. Right. In a way, I really wanted to heal faster, I guess. I mean, a lot of what I was learning like fascinates me and also informs my practice. So it's almost like concurrent. I did both at the same time, but it's very similar, right? It really helped me to have compassion for myself, to grieve. So there was a process of grieving. I did also go through EMDR. And now that I'm EMDR trained, I am so happy to be able to provide that service to my clients and allow them to kind of go through the same healing journey I did, right? Once they're ready to kind of go there, we can go there.
Yeah, I'm noticing more and more clients really do appreciate that if their therapist has some sort of insight or commonality to what they're going through.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, a lot of my clients come to me because they might be Asian and they just want someone who, gets it. They don't want to have to explain family dynamics, filial piety, the pressures of like, conforming and obedience, all of those kind of like very anti-individualism sort of like topics, but very much kind of more held in esteem for a lot of the collectivist societies. Particularly, of my culture, Asian, whether it be certain other Pacific Islander kind of populations, or maybe just generally people of color.
Yeah, I was one of a couple of my podcasts interviews before. We talked a lot about how a lot of psychology is very Western normative and male centric, the ivory towers like Freud and Jung and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And does it really speak to a lot of individuals nowadays, even generationally. And like you said, Asian Pacific Islander, people of color, like it's not what we were taught, or I was taught 10 years ago. It doesn't really align all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I've had my slew of like, going through the mental health system and being told, well, just don't listen to your parents. And I'm like,
that's not that easy.
What that means, that basically means getting disowned in a lot of.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, maybe good for clinical and kind of personal disclosure kind of stuff, but I have been disowned. So there's elements of that in my story as well. But I also have like a redemption arc where I'm no longer disowned. And so there's a lot of pieces of like healing that I can meet clients where they're at. I can understand. I can kind of measure the risks and the benefits and the costs and kind of play it out with them.
Again, you're aligning with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I do a lot of that. I think that's why clients come to see me. I think they find me like, you get it. You're personable. I like that you have lived experience. You're not speaking from just like your textbook knowledge, right? I'm not lecturing them. I can actually relate, having gone through my own mental health issues, my own trauma, my own, therapy experience, and letting them know this is, maybe it's not normal that you don't feel comfortable talking to your therapist, or maybe you should explore different options, or maybe I'm not, the best therapist for you because that's not within my scope of practice. So I do love to be able to equip my clients with a knowledge base that allows them to make informed decisions. So they know that they have options, which I never really understood that that was a thing in the mental health system.
We were taught blank slate, don't disclose, or very minimal. And I haven't found that helpful. I do believe you don't want to disclose too much or disclose the unnecessary things, of course. Yeah. Well, you mentioned, so you were disowned and then you were not disowned. So that's like your redemption arc.
Yeah.
Think a little bit more about that. It's like a story.
It's a really cool story. So my faith background, I do identify as Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I do strongly, practice my faith. I would say I'm pretty devout. So in a sense, when I was learning about what it means to not live in fear, it was primarily because of what I knew about my identity in Christ, which meant fear was not part of the equation, right? If there is fear there, there's no love. And I had recently, this is back in 2016. 2016, I had gone on a short-term missions trip to Indonesia, where I learned like a lot of, I not only just was able to contribute in my very small way. We helped out an orphanage. We held a vacation Bible school for the kids. But they taught me so much about love and about patience and about healing. I got to share parts of my story with them, and they were touched by it. All of this with translators, and of course, I don't know language. But coming back from that, I realized that my dynamics within even just going on that trip was, a lot of it was based in fear. I didn't want to tell my coworkers that I was going on a mission trip, because I was like, they're going to think I'm weird, or they're going to judge me, or they're going to fire, like my boss is going to fire me because I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. My parents aren't of the same religious background, faith background as me. So I was afraid they wouldn't approve. And they did, fortunately. But there was a lot of fear about telling them about why I was doing this, and I needed to fundraise and do all these sorts of things in order to afford the trip. When I came back, my now husband, he proposed to me, and it was met with a lot of, I wouldn't say they were approving. I showed my dad my ring, and he just frowned at me and shook his head. He didn't say any words. He just looked at me, shook his head in disappointment, and said nothing. And I was like, elate. And, I was elated. I was like, Dad, look, it finally happened. Like, I've been dating him for, 4 years. Like, this is happening. My dad said nothing. My mom, I think, was like less enthusiastic as well. And I was living with them at the time. But basically my story culminates with a decision for my husband and I to basically, in a sense, elope, right? There was no pleasing my parents. They had very high expectations for what it would look like to get married. I was living at home with them, and they almost had this sentiment of like traditional Asian culture. You don't leave the home if you're a girl until you get married. And so in a way, my husband thought he was rescuing me by like marrying me off. And,
Is your husband part of the same culture? Is he?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
Yeah. So the language barrier is not there. The cultural barrier might be because he's from a different region in terms of also like socioeconomic status. Like I would say my parents are like upper middle class to upper class. My dad's very much like, he thinks education is everything, higher education is everything. Be better, do more, study more. My husband, his parents didn't go to college. They are working class, kind of blue collar. They've made it kind of just by working hard and doing kind of sometimes menial jobs. And so very different kind of, we have the same culture. We're both Vietnamese and Vietnamese American, but in a lot of ways, very different culturally. It's almost like Prince and the Pauper or something like that. just very just out there. I don't know, kind of Romeo and Juliet, just like
The
we're not
SES,
supposed
right? Socioeconomic status.
yes,
Yeah.
SES, socioeconomic status, just not there. We're just tears, I guess. Of course, my mom wanted me to marry rich, right? My dad was saying, no, you need to be self-sustaining because he saw his sister undergo some kind of tragedy where she had to end up being like the primary breadwinner, right? So in his mind, don't depend on anybody, use your wits, be better because you're a minority, work hard. So I had almost like the expectation to be the man, stereotypically in Asian culture, but also the woman. So I don't know.
Confusing.
Very confusing. If they have a different faith background, they didn't like that we both identified as Christian. So it ultimately came down to my dad telling me, you're not going to get married. You cannot get married. I command you, you must obey me. Do not get married. We got married. We invited them. My mom criticized our invitation. She just said we were making a mistake. My brother I have 3 older brothers. Only one of them attended my wedding. They were all invited, but the other 2 aligned with my parents and said, you're breaking up the family. You're hurting mom and dad. So that started like about 6 months of just no contact. And my dad, kicked us out of the house, said, like, if we don't even know you, how can you be a Christian when you do this? You would even betray your own family and call yourself a Christian. A lot of hard things I had to hear as I was packing up and moving out. My mom, maybe this might, I don't know, trigger warning, I guess. My mom basically said she wished she had died on my wedding day. Yeah, she wished, and she even brought God into the equation. She was like, I wish God had killed me. So very extreme statements of like suicidal gesturing. She said that she lost 2 of her children that day because my brother walked me down the aisle and she no longer regarded me as her own child. So she only had 2 out of 4 kids at that point. A lot of ridiculous things. They both told me not to tell anybody about our marriage. If you
a lot
tell
of shame.
Yeah, a lot of shame. If you tell grandma, she's going to have a heart attack because how could you do this? How could you be like this? The redemption arc is basically, I still held true to my faith. My wedding day was beautiful. 60 of my closest friends and family from my family of faith, right? So spiritual kind of mentor, mother, father figures, attended. It was beautiful. It was like a great day. That same evening. So my wedding anniversary is coming up. It's actually the 23rd of December.
Oh, congratulations. Oh, right before Christmas. That's a lot of celebration in a row.
Yeah. It's interesting. It was only that way because we got married on our 5-year dating anniversary. And I was in school when we started dating, right? So I came home for the holidays and that's when he asked me out. And we just decided, why not make that our wedding anniversary date as well? So actually my husband, he said he's going shopping for our anniversary gift right now. We'll see how he does.
There we go.
Yeah, but it'll be our 7-year anniversary. And but at the time, right, 6 months or so of not being sure if I was still under their insurance because it was so messy. 6 months of not hearing from my siblings or only hearing from them to say that you messed up, that you damaged everything. 6 months of being revoked from family gatherings. Just a lot of confusion, but I had a lot of healing moments with my community outside of that. So the redemption basically comes when I decide for Mother's Day and Father's Day following my wedding to send them both a letter separately to just acknowledge and honor the parent that they were, right? I didn't acknowledge all the ways they messed me up. I wanted to focus and say, you know, Mom, I still appreciate you for demonstrating generosity. I still want to honor you for being a loving, you know, contributing, you know, hardworking woman, very, very hospitable, very, very sweet kind of woman, right? I wrote that in a letter. I sent it with a Polaroid picture. It happened to be around Mother's Day at my church, and they had Polaroid cameras so you can write letters to your moms. I used that opportunity to honor my mom. And I felt that conviction because of that Sunday's sermon, which was about honoring your mom. Even though she might not be the best, but there are still qualities that you can still look back on and appreciate. She was your mom for a reason. Similarly, I reached out to my dad for Father's Day, very similar message of, you know, he provided, he was hardworking, he was a strong, sacrificial sort of person, you know, I think I get a lot of my humor from him. So aspects of that I had to, you know, call out and admire and honor. And as soon as I did that, emails started coming. My dad emailed me back. Hey, when are we going to meet up? Hey, we're ready to talk again. Interestingly enough, when we do meet up and my dad says, hey, we're going to sit down and pray. He prays over our meeting and he basically says, I have a daughter again. And I am so thankful she's here. And I could tell my mom was a little dragging her feet on this about like recognizing that I was married and now she has a son through my husband, you know, but it was interesting to say that they both were able to acknowledge it and they wanted to celebrate. So they kind of did like a mini public dinner wedding thing for me and my husband just to introduce us as married to the rest of the family, which a lot of the family knew, but they weren't allowed to talk about it, I guess. So, I mean, at this point, it's been like pretty good. I think that healing, I mean, maybe I would say even that boundary of setting that with my parents, they have not crossed me in that way. Because I think they know they could lose me again in some sense.
Yeah.
So there were times where I felt like, oh my gosh, they are only 10 to 15 minutes away from me. They could show up at my doorstep at any time and start, you know, pestering me or invading my space or, you know, criticizing me. It never happened. And I think maybe it was because they knew they couldn't take that chance with me. I had already grown up. I was now a married woman and they couldn't. Hopefully they saw me more as an adult rather than their baby.
That transition that a lot of parents have to go through.
Yeah. I know for my dad, up until I got married, that was something he like pleaded with me. He was like, I know you want to move out, but I just want to see you. Even just like your shadow when you come home at night. We don't have to say anything to each other. I just want to know that you're around. And he was, you know, getting more sentimental. He sent letters to my brother saying things that he regretted or that he wished he did. And he cried. And like, this is a man that does not cry. So he was getting very, very sentimental and kind of mushy. And so I knew he couldn't become like an empty nester. He was dreading it. He was not. And I think that's ultimately why he said, you cannot get married. Right.
Are you the youngest?
I am the youngest.
And you're the daughter.
And the daughter. I know. And my dad has told me on many occasions, you are my favorite child. And I would be like, Dad, you can't say that. It's so jacked up.
Oh, now you're telling the whole world.
Yeah, I know. I mean, they'll find out eventually. I do want to read more.
They have to know someday.
Eventually. Yeah.
Hmm.
I have to say things have come a long way. I don't really understand why it had to be so dramatic, really.
Mm-hmm.
But in a way, maybe that's just how my family understands boundaries. It's not until you like a huge, severe consequence where they understand, oh, they mean business.
Hmm. And I'm maybe that, and you would only know, was how they understood boundaries from their parents and how their parents understood boundaries from their grandparents and
Oh, I wouldn't
so
even know
forth.
that because, like I said, my mom keeps a tight lid on her history. I've never met my grandmother on that side. I've never
Mm,
met certain siblings on that side. She only talks about them in like passing by, but yeah, I think for my dad, especially, I think I know his trauma, right? He's never been hugged by his own dad. His dad never told him he loved him. My dad's a hugger because he
yeah.
went the opposite direction. He was like, if I never got hugs, I'm going to make sure my kids hug me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hug
My
your
dad,
shadow.
yeah, he's like a physical touch guy. So it's interesting how he took that. And though for a while it did traumatize me because I didn't want to hug my dad because I was afraid of him, I was terrified of him. He was scary. I understand now that he was like trying to reclaim his own hurt.
Mm,
He never got hugged by his dad. He never got told I love you. My dad's very, I guess, on that in that sense, he's very affectionate. If he's never experienced any of that, he's more on the affectionate side. He when I see him nowadays, he'll just be like, "Where's my hug?" And come in
oh,
with open arms, and he'll be like, very, very affectionate in that way.
he's reclaiming, like you said, he's reclaiming that. And by doing that, it is changing future generations in that generational tree, the generational patterns.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like we've done some like overhaul in this garden. So this tree, some of those like branches that have been rotting, they've been pruned.
Hmm.
The roots probably had to be retrained to go a different route. I don't know. I think there's a lot of work in the family that I can see. Um, like I pride myself on being a cycle breaker, right? If it started with me, and it's kind of gotten ripple effects, then I am happy and pleased to say that it's happening. It's happening now rather than generations later.
Yeah, being a cycle breaker. And millennials, Gen Zers, I feel that is, at least as therapists, that is a lot of the focus. Like, we're going to be cycle breakers.
Right. Like we don't want this dysfunction to continue. It stops with me, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to get my healing. And I see so much of that in my office, right? With my sessions with my clients, a lot of them come to me. I don't know how this works. I've never had therapy before. I don't really want to tell my parents I'm in therapy. They don't get it.
Mm.
They would think I'm crazy or they think therapy is silly or just for crazy people. So I see a lot of that. I mean, I'm the first person in my family, my immediate family, to get therapy. I think one of my brothers has gotten therapy. Not sure about the other two, but I do see a lot of healing happening. And I guess maybe it started backwards with me, right?
It's usually the daughters.
What can we say? I think we're just smarter.
Yeah. So I always, where did I hear that? It's usually the daughters. So we're getting close to time, and I hear the redemption arc reminds me of hope
Oh
and
yes.
resilience, and that is what my podcast is about. Hope, healing, and resilience. So, what brings you hope?
Well, I would bring it back to my faith in Jesus Christ because you know, I'm a very different person before I met Jesus. I have hope because I have Jesus. I used to be a very pessimistic, kind of nihilistic person. I don't know if I would be cut out for this field if I were just to tell all my clients, life sucks. You're just going to die and that's it.
Oh, jeez.
But I would say, yeah, I can't do the things that I've done. For instance, reach out that olive branch with honoring my parents, right? Without even hearing a sorry from them or any kind of admission of guilt or responsibility on their part. So I feel like a lot of my motivation and conviction and my worldview has been the hope that I have in a God that is so much bigger than me, so much more loving, so much more wise. I know I'm so finite, and I think that's where I find so much hope and so much peace in knowing that I don't have to have it all together, but I have someone who is on my side and is fighting on my behalf, and the victory is already there. Yeah. So I would say my faith, really, I don't know if I could do what I do on the daily without my faith, because I'm sure you've probably met therapists that are burnt out, jaded. I think that's generally naturally what's going to happen if you hear enough bad news day in and day out, or you're stuck with clients who aren't making progress, or things just seem bleak and hopeless. But I know at the end of the day, it's not about what I can do. It's about what is being done through me. I have a hope that is bigger, more beautiful. It's eternal. It's just beyond me. So I live for that.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Well, I'm glad to share that. I'm really glad to be able to share a lot of. I didn't think I'd go into so much of my story, but if you can get any consolation, there is hope. There's always hope.
Yes. Lan, that's very true. And I appreciate you sharing your story and being very vulnerable, with my listeners. And, it sounds like a lot of the takeaways is being a cycle breaker, and honoring your parents where they were at too. Yeah. And being open to healing. And so thank you.
You're welcome.
Another great interview. You can find Lan on Instagram and YouTube. I will put that in the show notes, along with her website. Lan specializes mostly with AAPI or BIPOC adults and millennials who are coping with intergenerational childhood or complex trauma. Narcissistic abuse, codependency, grief, and first-time therapy seekers are also additional clientele she works with. She helps those through dating and self-confidence, attachment issues, and unhealthy family dynamics. Again, you can find all of her information in the show notes, where you can follow her on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and her webpage. Thank you for listening to Hopeology. If you enjoyed today's show, please leave us a review. To learn more about us or listen to past episodes, you can find us on all your podcast streaming stations. If you are interested in being a guest, or if you have any feedback, please email us at hopeologypodcast@gmail.com. You can also support our show by clicking on the link in our show notes. Please also follow our Instagram page, Hopeology Podcast, and visit our website, www.hopeologypodcast.com.